प्रत्येक देशवासी से एक और समर्थन मांग रहा हूं। ये है जनता कर्फ्यू। जनता कर्फ्यू यानी जनता के लिए, जनता द्वारा खुद पर लगाया गया कर्फ्यू।
Exactly a year ago, we first heard of the words Janta curfew. It was supposed to be one day of staying indoors and then in the evening marking the bravery of our frontline warriors, the medical professionals, by banging thalis. It was a one-day experiment. Even at that point, there were fears that were beginning that this could be a longer scenario, but no one really saw what was coming just a couple of days later on the 24th of March at 8 p.m. when the country went into lockdown. No one knew for how long that would be, and then there were extensions and even more extensions. The last 1 year has taught us all a lot, and over the next few days we're going to go through some of those important moments, the lessons learned, and how we can forge ahead as we have got some experience of how to deal with COVID-19 and its aftermath. But today, for starters, we're going to be talking about one bunch of really resilient people who don't always get the credit that is due. Yes, we speak about our frontline workers, we speak about our health workers, the policemen, etc. But when lockdown was actually announced, these were the people that everyone rushed to first. I'm talking about the humble neighborhood Kirana wala, the grocer, who was at the receiving end of panicked calls, demands for much more stock, trying to get that material from somewhere or the other, and at the same time braving COVID. My colleague Priyanka Iyer traces back that journey.
First place people ran to when lockdown was announced at 8 p.m. on 24th March 2020 was the local Kirana store. As panic gripped, people wanted to stock up on their essentials. Over the next few days and weeks, the neighborhood store was the only lifeline people had. While customers adjusted to the new way of shopping for daily essentials, the owners of these stores too had to move away from their traditional way of functioning and adjust to the new normal. Ashish Gupta's store sees an average footfall of 700 customers daily. During the lockdown, the daily footfall had increased to 2,000 customers who had to be served within the time constraints under which stores were allowed to operate. So, how did he ensure enough availability of products?
उस टाइम पे हम कंपनी के हायर लेवल मैनेजमेंट से कांटेक्ट में थे, डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर सप्लायर से हाई लेवल जो भी है बातचीत हो रही थी, बल्क बाइंग हो रही थी, मार्जिन प्रेशर बहुत आ रहा था क्योंकि हमें जिस प्रकार के इंसेंटिव्स और डिस्काउंट्स जो मिलते थे वो कम्प्लीटली बंद हो गए थे. कॉस्ट ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्टेशन, कॉस्ट ऑफ डिलीवरिंग, कॉस्ट ऑफ गेटिंग द स्टॉक वाज गेटिंग हाई. हमने कंपनी से बात करके डायरेक्ट कस्टमर्स के लिए बड़े एसक्यू स्टॉक्स जो जनरली ऑनलाइन और मॉडर्न ट्रेड में मिलते हैं हमने वो मंगवाना शुरू किया. जो कस्टमर पहले सिर्फ पाव किलो आधा किलो का स्टॉक लेता था, हम कस्टमर्स कंपनी वालों से बात करके बड़े 1 kg के 2 kg के पैक्स हमने सप्लाई करने शुरू किए.
Delivery of goods to stores had stopped, and Punaram Chaudhary, who owns a small Kirana store, had to rush to distribution centers far away every day to procure stock.
स्टॉक मतलब इधर कंपनी वाले आते थे, लेकिन बाद में जब लॉकडाउन हुआ उसके बाद में कंपनी वाले आने बंद हो गए. सब हम लोग जाके डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर के पास जाके लाइन लगा के उधर से माल लेके आते थे और माल देते थे. तो थोड़ी तकलीफ होती थी, हम लोग को भी होती थी, कस्टमर को भी होती थी, लेकिन बाद में चला, इतना प्रॉब्लम नहीं हुआ.
Another change was the shift to digital payments as people were wary of exchanging cash. 58% of customers in metros chose to pay via digital modes in the thick of the lockdown, according to a EY report.
कैश लेने के लिए भी तभी इतना टेंशन था, हाथ में लेने डर लगता था हमें. तो हमने तो पहले ही मैनेज कर लिया था ये सब ऑनलाइन सिस्टम, लेकिन कुछ छोटे दुकानदार थे जो स्मॉल, जो पढ़े लिखे भी नहीं है, कुछ ऐसा भी प्रॉब्लम आ जाता है, तो उन्होंने अडोप्ट नहीं किया था. लेकिन उनको भी हम लोग ने प्रेशराइज किया कि आप ये सब सिस्टम अडोप्ट कीजिए आप. अभी मैक्सिमम स्टेबल है. उस टाइम चलो हम माने चलो 100% था, लेकिन अभी 80% तक तो चालू ही है क्योंकि पब्लिक ने एक्सेप्ट कर लिया है डिजिटल पेमेंट.
As the frenzy died down and normalcy returned, these stores that served thousands of customers at stretched margins a year ago are now witnessing a slowdown. Some claim that sales have reduced by 50% in comparison to pre-COVID levels. Before the pandemic began, it seemed like e-commerce giants are winning the race against Kirana stores. But a year later, we can see that Kiranas are the unbeatable choice for the Indian customer. In fact, this is the next big space for competition as FMCG players and e-commerce giants fight it out for a bigger share for back-end partnerships with these Kirana stores. Priyanka Iyer in Mumbai for ET Now.
When we talk about the 1 year since lockdown, one key point to ponder and one key aspect to look at, of course, apart from the health impact, the lives lost, the illnesses, is the economic impact. And for COVID-19, it's gone hand in hand. Some suffered from COVID-19 and many, many more suffered in any case because of COVID-19, whether they were infected or not. This is because the lockdown, the restriction in activity, people having to stay at home had a huge impact on the economy. On all sectors, the economy came to a complete standstill. A year later, we've realized a few things, that we are a resilient economy. We've seen a sharp bounce back, but on the other hand, that bounce back has also been uneven. We also have to wonder whether we can make up for what we lost economically because of COVID-19 while continuing to save lives. To speak on this, I'm joined today by Dr. Arvind Panagariya. Dr. Panagariya, thank you so much for speaking with us here at ET Now as we mark this 1 year which has been momentous for everyone around the world, and thank you for staying with us through this journey as well. So let me begin with your opening comments when we look at it 1 year later, and we are speaking just a year after lockdowns first began. In fact, 1 year, exactly 1 year today was when the Janta curfew was put in place as a small token, and many of us didn't know, actually no one knew that this is what's going to come next. Looking back, do you think that the lockdown was a good idea or was it a mistake?
Okay, first of all, thank you, Tamanna, for having me again. And we have been discussing this COVID crisis throughout the year at regular intervals. Now, first of all, what I had predicted has come true, which is that the year is going to be very unpredictable because the spread of infection was very unpredictable. And the numbers that people were predicting were all over, and none really was on the mark, I would say. To the question of whether the lockdown was the right thing to do, I still think that at the time the decision was made based on the information that we had at that time. That was the right decision. At the time, we did not even know what our own capacity would be to enforce anything that would keep people out of, keep people from coming in close contact with each other and all. So at that point, strict lockdowns seemed to be the kind of only option in a way that was implementable. And a lot of learning was required. And we also needed the time to beef up our infrastructure, by which I mean having enough supply of masks. We needed the enough supply of PPEs. We needed to prepare. It was almost like, even in a war, you get a little more time to prepare. But this one came so suddenly and so unexpectedly that it was essential to give ourselves some time to prepare. So I still think that Prime Minister made the right choice.
I want to talk about the quality of recovery we've seen, and much has been said. You and I have had a chance to speak about what kind of recovery we've seen. A lot of celebration about the fact that at least we're in positive territory by Q3 of this financial year at 0.4% after that big plunge of nearly 25% in the first quarter. Many marveling at the resilience that India has shown. But on the other hand, as per a recent report by the OECD, India is slated to have reduced the most or grown the least, with minus 7.8% for this year among large countries. How would you look at the quality of India's recovery?
The recovery post this sharp decline has been actually quite good. Now, the decline was very sharp and probably something like 24 or 25% decline in the April, May, June quarter was the sharpest of any of the major economies. And much of the decline in the annual GDP that we have seen is really coming from that particular quarter, because even in the following quarter, which is July, August, September, the decline had dropped to something like 7.8% or so. And then subsequently in the subsequent months, we have continued to progress fairly well, and we are more or less close to the pre-COVID level of economic activity now. So I think, given the resources of the country, given the magnitude of the shock, I think we have done pretty well, actually, and above all, most important factor is the management of the COVID crisis itself. If you look at the death rates in India, among the 20 most affected countries, India's death rate is actually the lowest. This is deaths per 100,000 population. So that's quite remarkable. This is the 20 most affected countries, include countries like the United States, Brazil, United Kingdom, France, Italy. So among all those countries, our death rate actually has been the lowest. So in the, we come 20th on that. And also on case fatality ratio, meaning that, deaths per 100 infections, that is also the lowest among these 20 most affected countries. And that is very, very important. In the end, it is all about human life.
No, that's absolutely, it's all about human lives, absolutely, Dr. Panagariya. But today we're speaking specifically about the economic impact, and there's something to say for the fact that while India has had relatively fewer deaths, and kudos to all the decisions taken for that, it has also had an outsized impact on livelihoods, especially in the informal sector. Your employment figures from CMIE still point that we are a far way off from pre-COVID levels. You have situations where income levels, especially in the informal sector, are still quite battered. And how can we really overcome that?
Right. Now, I think this again goes back to what we have discussed throughout the year, Tamanna, that the threat of infections, and that has reappeared. The recovery has been progressing quite well, actually. And whereas, what you mentioned is correct, but though it was largely concentrated in the first two quarters of the COVID, subsequently, I think, we have done well, but now the threat has reappeared. And so, and threat has reappeared precisely in some of the states which account for disproportionately large proportion of economic activity. And so in the end, that is, I think, the first order of business. On the management of the economy by the government, I think the government is doing absolutely the right things. I still think, going back to our earlier discussions, that the government has turned out to be quite right, actually, in its earlier approach of not going whole hog through fiscal expansion. Because it simply wouldn't have translated into actual expansion, even if such large transfers as the United States and other countries tried had been made in India. And evidence actually points to that. In the United States, a large part of the transfers have actually ended up converting into savings, not expenditure, even though in the US, perhaps because of the online delivery systems being superior, expenditure would have been possible, but it didn't translate. And in India, it would have been much harder to translate any of the transfers into expenditure. So that was correct. Now the government actually has been expanding as fast as it can, the fiscal expansion. And that is the right thing to do right now. My own tax refund has been now transferred to my bank account. So, one of the things I was saying, rapidly clear all the dues that the government owes to the people, the companies, and so forth. That's one way to expand the spending rapidly. But also on infrastructure, the government is trying to move, and it has been it has made fairly generous provisions in the coming budget as well, and has gone out on its limb to expand the fiscal deficit. So I think in terms of the policies, we are doing largely all the right things. But again, it will depend on how well we are able to contain the current rising wave of infections, which has been rising very rapidly, I must say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll come to that in a bit, because that's the big cause of concern. Will all of this bring us back to square one a year later? And that's what one doesn't hope for. But I just want a sense from you, Dr. Panagariya, on what is happening in India and in the global economy as well, where hardening bond yields has sent equity into a tizzy. How do you see this situation panning out, and what are the real concerns here going ahead?
I think globally things are looking up because of the vaccines. Now, the United States has been vaccinating the population very rapidly, and currently doing at a rate of about more than 2 million per day. The president has promised that starting May 1, he will open up the vaccination to the entire population everywhere. Of course, a lot of the decisions in the United States also get made by the states, but states are moving quite rapidly also. So I think that means that the US can really pick up its economic pace fairly quickly. All signs point to that. Right, policy measures have also been announced. If anything, the United States has actually gone, it has basically taken the approach of let us for now do the expansion as necessary, and even if it's over expansion, that's probably meaning very, very large transfers, the latest package being $1.9 trillion worth, and so it is taking all the necessary policy measures as well. So I think the US will do well. China, which is the second largest economy, is doing quite well as well, and it also grew, had some modest growth actually in the previous year. And Europeans are a little bit behind on vaccines, I must say. The supply has been a bit of a challenge there. But overall, I think the global economy, to me, looks like would do reasonably well. It will return to the past activity, or almost to the past activity, meaning that so the growth is going to be positive, and perhaps 3 to 4% at least in the global economy. So on that front, we are covered. Trade is reviving as well, so that also, and it is showing up in the Indian trade figures too. So I think there are reasons to be optimistic, but we have to be cautious.
Yeah, one of the things which possibly we need to be cautious about, and I'd like your view on this, is what is going to happen to the banking system and the NPA situation. Now, the 6-month moratorium kind of kicked the can down the road. A lot of rules have been relaxed to make sure businesses survive. But those concerns, do you think they're real now and genuine now, as things have eased up and recoveries have taken place in the economy, that we will now need to have a close relook at the NPA problem?
Absolutely. I think that is the most critical area in which the government needs to beef up its efforts. Now, in terms of the announcements, the budget did well, but translating those announcements into actual implementation is going to be the key, extremely important, and I'm referring to here the ARC, the asset reconstruction company that, or the bad bank that the budget provided for. It is extremely critical that that particular piece of the announcement is quickly translated into action, because our NPAs to begin with have been very large, and we have discussed it throughout the year that, look, we went into this crisis with a very stressed financial sector, and that partly sort of accounts for also the large decline we experienced in the GDP growth and the level of the GDP actually. And so to come back out of the current crisis, de-stressing the financial sector is probably the most important specific policy measure that the government needs to take. And that, of course, means cleaning up the NPAs. So the instrument, I think, is sort of right, but it has also to be implemented with speed. And because, credit growth is going to be critical, as you have said very rightly, that the bankruptcies induced by COVID will happen. And we did kick the can down the road, which was the right policy. I mean, I think, again, I don't want to be disparaging about it, because at that time, you did not want the healthy firms also to actually go under on account of liquidity problems. But the weaker firms, which would actually go down because they were weaker firms, that would happen as now the period of postponement of the bankruptcies is coming to an end. So yes, I think that is also my opinion. I had said this earlier, well before the budget announcements also, that we ought to be prepared now. I would have actually preferred a much larger recapitalization package for the banks. The government announced 20,000 crore. This would probably turn out to be too small, as had been the case previously in the first round, the previous round in 2015, we started off with a package of about 70,000 crore. In the end, it had to go beyond about 2 lakh crores. And this time also, I think this 20,000 crore will turn out to be smaller, especially if we are not able to actually act fast enough on this bad bank instrumentality. So if that is going slower than expected, I would say that the government should step in that case, with a much larger recapitalization package.
Your thoughts on the DFI, which has been announced recently, and the outline also has to be put in place. How crucial is this to kick off? I mean, some say that it's old wine in a new bottle, that several vehicles of this sort to fund infrastructure projects have been around but have not really made a mark. What do you think could be different this time around?
Yes, I share some of the skepticism on that, because on infrastructure, this has been a struggle. And I remember that there was, in I think it was 2016 perhaps, there were proposals for this, what was it, National Infrastructure Fund or something it was called, with 10,000 crore rupees it was supposed to be started. And till 2 years later, hardly any progress had happened on that. So yeah, I think there are a number of things on which, progress has been slower, and each next time one hopes that things will speed up this time in view of the past history. But I'm not close enough now to have an assessment or a judgment. But I do hope that, we move on all these fronts rapidly, because you're absolutely right. Infrastructure spending has to pick up in a bigger way. And instruments actually for financing of infrastructure have been relatively scarce. I think, because these are very long-term projects, and then there are also often obstacles in terms of land acquisition delays, delays in the clearances for environment purpose reasons and all. So we do need to move fast on all these fronts. And that, of course, means, harder and swifter, harder work for the bureaucracy, and also swifter decision-making processes.
I want to come back to the pressing issue at this point while I speak with you, which is a spike in numbers in all India cases, around 48,000 per day. We are very close to the peaks. and it is troubling because it's beyond just one or two states, and we don't seem to be able to keep pace in terms of our vaccination with the number of cases. Do you think this could wreck things? There is a Nomura report already for this month which says mobility has reduced and this is impacting business activity.
Look, this has been my line throughout the year, that how rapidly we can get back to work is going to depend on, and therefore how rapidly can the economy recover is going to depend on how well we are able to contain the infections. And this particular wave is really very troubling because, we had gone to over, very, very large, very high peak, that is, very large number of daily cases we had gone up to in September. And then we, that wave came almost, I would say, sharply coming down. And it looked very good. It has fallen to 15,000, 10,000 range. And no sooner we didn't even, usually you would expect that there will be some plateau for a while, at that low level. But that's not how it has played out. We have started rising back very sharply, very quickly. And that, of course, is going to impact the mobility. Many of the restrictions that we had lifted will have to be brought back. The government has no choices in these matters. In the end, health will come first, lives will come first, above the economy, I should say. It is in the nature of things. Maybe, one way would be, and I'm sure the government is thinking along those lines, would be to, move our supplies of vaccines into the area which are heavily impacted, into the states, so maybe not, some of the decisions that are made nationwide, for example, when we say 50 or above, you're restricting the vaccines to, maybe in some states, you restrict it more, where you don't have the imminent threat of infections, where the threat is already underway. Maybe you go much more rapidly and even allow vaccines to be administered to population that's below 50. So, that's a way to redistribute the vaccine supplies. I'm not sure politically how that plays out, but that would seem to me to be one possible option to contain these also heavily populated areas. I mean, we know that Maharashtra clearly is one state where this has been a very serious problem throughout. And perhaps, we need to bring the vaccines much faster, much more intensively into Maharashtra.
Thank you so much, Dr. Panagariya, for speaking with us. And you're absolutely right. The focus needs to be now on vaccinations, because as compared to a year ago, at least we have that. That is our one weapon to fight back against COVID-19 as it rears its ugly head once again, and we shouldn't let this opportunity go to waste.
Yes, indeed. And thank you for having me, Tamanna.